up, everybody? Coach Mel's here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down Valorant tier list 4.05, talking about all the best weapons and the weapons that you should probably avoid, when to use each one, and what is the undisputed best weapon. There's a lot of questions that we got to answer and break down, but the GameLeap website is the #1 place to dominate the ranked ladder. We have many people in the GameLeap community climbing all the way to Diamond, Immortal, and yes, even Radiant. So if you want to join all of the success stories, do yourself a favor and go check it out right now down below. Now we're going to start off with the D tier, and you might be asking, okay, what about F tier? Well, actually, there are no weapons that are F tier. Honestly, even the minimum, or what I consider the worst weapon in the game right now, is still decently strong, and no weapon warrants the actual F tier. And the D tier is occupied by one gun, and it's the Bucky. Now, the Bucky used to be freaking broken with its convergent alternate fire, but ever since that got removed, the Bucky is in a really weird spot. For that price tag, you can buy alternatives like the Sheriff, and that requires a lot more skill, yes, but the value is aplenty there. The Bucky is really only good in a very specific situation. If you're not in the optimal range, you will not one-pump someone. The Convergence alternate fire is basically unusable the majority of the time, and I do think that if you wanted to make the Bucky viable, you would have to buff it in some regard, but I'm perfectly fine with it being exactly where it's at. And yeah, that's why it's in the D tier. Next up, we do gotta talk about the C tier, and there's 3 weapons I have in the C tier: the Odin, the Stinger, and the Shorty. First off, let's talk about the Odin. The only reason the Odin is this low is because of its price tag. The Odin can be powerful at wall banging, creating a ton of bullet pressure, and there's a lot of cheeky wallbang spots that you can actually abuse on a map like Haven that can get you tons of free value. However, oftentimes it's a waste buying this over a rifle, and the fact that it's priced above it means it's pretty hard to justify. And yes, I understand if you're in some of the lower ranks, the Odin can be absolutely dominant, but as you go up against better and better players, people that can consistently dink you if you ever stop and crouch and don't instantly kill someone, you will start to realize the huge weaknesses around the Odin. Not that it's not strong in some situations, but it's just not always the best, and it's really expensive. Now, the next weapon we gotta talk about is the Stinger. And unfortunately, the Stinger has a tiny mag, and it needs to be in very close ranges to be effective. And honestly, for the price tag, there are more competitive options that, yes, might require more skill in a lot of cases. However, the Stinger is often going to be an all or nothing weapon. And without a form of mobility, it might be a little bit difficult getting the value out of the Stinger that you want, and you might not get into the right range to even get that first kill. Now, the last weapon in the C tier, or the top of the C tier, is the Shorty. And the reason that the Shorty is up so high compared to these other weapons is because it's so damn cheap. The possibility of holding a really close angle, someone walks in, doesn't clear you, you get to kill them and just get to upgrade very cheaply is great. But if you've ever been in a retake scenario with the Shorty, you know that the gun is absolutely miserable, and it really takes an enemy to not clear you out with utility in order to get value out of the Shorty. So it's going to directly depend on how disciplined the enemy is at clearing you out and what characters you're up against. That being said, the real reason that the Shorty is so low compared to some of the other guns is because of its direct competition up against the freaking classic pistol. When we think about the Shorty, yes, at the absolute closest ranges, it's worse than the classic pistol, but in every other range, the classic pistol is not only better, but more versatile, capable of bursting people from close ranges and doing decent damage from mid to even further ranges when the Shorty is useless. And it's free. It's not, 200 credits, and most of the time, that extra 200 credits could buy you an ability that would get far more value than the difference between the classic and the Shorty. Now, next up, we got to talk about the B tier. And at the bottom of the B tier, we have the Judge. Now, the Judge is menace to all, especially anyone that goes up against Das Nerf in ranked. But all joking aside, the Judge is crazy powerful. It's one of those guns that can punish you so damn hard for not getting the person out with utility. It just is insane. Like, imagine rushing a site without clearing the corner, and the Judge user gets to one pump potentially 2 separate people, or just easily fight with someone, and you get to jump and move and run, and the gun is still goddamn accurate. This gun is so powerful, and you could even put it on a character that has a way to get in, right? Someone like Neon flying in, someone maybe even like Jet. And while the gun could be a gamble, just like some of the other shotguns or close range weapons when we talk about defense, you know, you're holding a sight and they might go to the other site. The thing is, if they come to your site, you're very, very likely to get a kill with the judge and sometimes even multiple kills. This gun is incredibly powerful and sometimes can turn a gamble into just an absolute jackpot. Next up, we got to talk about two weapons in the B tier towards the top, the Bulldog and the Guardian. I'm kind of putting these close together. The Bulldog is really, really strong. A lot of people don't practice with this gun enough to really utilize its strengths. The great thing about it, with proper crosshair placement, oftentimes if you just burst, you will hit multiple bullets at the enemy, one in the head, one in the body, or two in the head, and kill people just like that. So you can still use this weapon similar to how you would use other rifles. It does require you to have really, really good gunplay discipline. You often will not win a spray battle with this gun. And most of the time, it takes you just really taking those small bursts, and you kind of got to get used to the gun a lot. I would suggest practicing with it. But in actuality, if you can actually buy this gun, like you can afford it with armor, as opposed to often buy like a rifle with light, most of the time, this is actually better. Most people kind of go for their comfort pick because they don't have the faith in the Bulldog or they're not comfortable enough with it. But I promise you, this gun is incredibly underrated. Next up, we do got to talk about the Guardian. The Guardian is going to shine more when you're holding longer sight lines and fighting on maps with more longer sight lines. Like, it's going to be better on a map like Breeze compared to some of the other closer range maps in the game. But you can make it work if you can afford it. That being said, it's still absolutely garbage in any close range encounter, so that can be exploited. And I also don't suggest you buy up to something like a Guardian if you win that first pistol round, even if you can afford it, because it's going to be worse up against players that are not playing proper angles and instead trying to run and gun you. Like, the Guardian is legitimately better up against something like a Vandal or even an Op than it is against a goddamn Spectre user, like getting you in a situation where you're kind of pushing into sight and then they just run you down, because it's a lot harder to tap that fool just moving like a psychopath than it is for the Vandal user holding the proper corner that you're clearing. Now, the last weapon that we actually have in the B tier is actually the Frenzy, and I'm not entirely sure where this actually belongs. It could be at the bottom of B tier, but I'm just putting it generally in the B tier. The Frenzy is pretty powerful. It's not as strong as it used to be back when you could buy armor with the Frenzy, which was found out to be broken. But the Frenzy is still really, really good. It's really great, especially in the hands of duelists, Reyna, Raze, Jet. These characters can almost guarantee a kill if they are swinging on someone in that first pistol round with the Frenzy. It's a pretty reasonable weapon to have as your secondary if you're rocking the Op with a lot of money. I also think that it's just great of just outputting damage when enemies are very, very low. And honestly, the Frenzy kind of gets overshadowed by some of the other eco options, but for that cheap price, it's really, really strong, and it packs quite a bit above its weight class. Next up, we got to talk about A tier, baby. And these are weapons that are very, very powerful, weapons that you should know how to use or know how to play against. First off, we got to talk about Ares at the bottom of the A tier. Could have been put in the top of the B tier, but I think that the Ares just edges it out based on its specific utility and how powerful that is. On some characters like Sova, you're going to be able to get extra value out of the Ares with wall bangs, and especially when you know where to hold and where to play with the Ares, you can get so much extra value out of that just bullet spray that in many cases, it's going to be better than even having a rifle. Now, it's definitely not a weapon that you should be buying every time. And honestly, a lot of people end up buying the Ares when they really should be buying something like the Spectre instead. That being said, there are still really important areas and times where the Ares is powerful, and that is enough of a reason for it to be at the A tier. Now, the next weapon at the A tier is actually the Marshal, and the Marshal is crazy freaking strong. This is a weapon that just has the capability of completely flipping eco rounds on their head. The enemy is buying rifles or even ops, and you whip out that Marshal, you hit your shots, and out of nowhere, you could get pick after pick. Now, of course, the Marshal is going to be best on characters like Chamber and Jet, but they're just good in general, especially if you can afford it. Like if you're in a round where your team has to save, maybe you're holding defense and you're holding a long sight line, you can just buy the Marshal and potentially just shred people, do 101, or even just potentially get kills. And in a lot of cases, you'll either do a lot of damage or you'll just get some free picks up against enemies with crazy better guns. Now, it's hard to be consistent with the Marshal because it's very, very difficult shots to hit. But oftentimes, when you're playing at a fundamental disadvantage, it's okay to play with a weapon that is high variance or high skill, because if you can kind of rise to that challenge, then that's a way to overcome that natural economic advantage. And the Marshal also can just allow you to play safe if you have a get out of jail free card, like that Chamber, like that Jet. You could just do damage, or even if you miss, you could get out, relocate, and things like that. Next up in the A tier, we do got to talk about the Spectre. Probably the most reliable weapon that you can buy. It's typically what you're going to want to buy after you win that first round. It's reliable. It has a huge magazine. It's almost never going to lose up against people that are just like saving with the classic because of how consistent it is. It's very easy to control the spray. And that means that, you know, you're not going to have to just perfectly dink people or you die, right? There's a lot of wiggle room here for error, a huge margin for error on this weapon. And that reliability means that it's almost guaranteed that you're going to win that second round if like your whole team buys Spectres, for instance. That being said, if your whole team buys like Vandal plus light armor, for instance, and then you fight someone that is like strafing left and right with a goddamn classic pistol, and maybe you miss that one dink and then you can't control the weapon. And because you're only 125, they actually kill you, take your gun, and now all of a sudden, your team might lose because you gave them a really strong gun. That is far less likely to happen with Armor plus Spectre. I'm not saying that you can't actually do that. I'm saying that the risk is a lot less with the Spectre plus Armor because it has smaller margin for error, less needed skill, more reliability. And for all those reasons, it's a very powerful and reliable weapon, and it deserves near the top of A tier. Now, the last weapon that we have in the A tier is actually the Ghost Pistol. And the Ghost Pistol is a go-to. It's often used in pro play and ranked play alike. That being said, sometimes it can feel a little bit unrewarding to buy that Ghost Pistol when you still get fucking rolled by a classic. And that is just one of the most frustrating aspects of the gun. But besides that, the Ghost is still a staple in that first round. That being said, it's not a weapon that will see that much play outside of the first round of each reset attack and defense, because it's really great there, but you're not going to often like buy Ghost on an eco because there's other options. You're not often going to have just enough money to buy a gun, and Ghost is going to be what you choose, meaning that unless it's being carried over from that first round, it will often not see that much play, and because of that, it's only in the A tier, even though it's a very good weapon. Now, let's move on to the S tier. These are the best of the best. These are the top weapons that you could be using, and of course, you need to master each and every one of these and have counter strategies to dominate them. First off, we got to talk about that classic pistol. We just mentioned it. Classic pistol is free, and it's in that S tier because it's so goddamn powerful. Like, the fact that they gave a shotgun on a pistol, like, are we still over that? Is that already a thing that everyone is just like cool with? Because it's so strong. The fact is, you can one-tap people with the classic pistol with that right click, full shield. If you get 2 in the head, they're done. You could also just shoot people regular style with the pistol. It's not the best, but it's not honestly that bad, and you can catch people off guard with it. And really, the classic pistol is a very versatile weapon for the low price of free. I mean, it's really, really strong. Most of the time, if you're in a 2v1, even up against a better weapon, if you get the first shot on them, y'all will win that 2v1 with the classic pistol. One of you will survive. One of you will get an upgrade. It's just a really reliable, strong weapon. And I do think that especially getting good as you can, as consistent as you can with the classic right click is going to allow you to clutch up a lot of rounds you have no business winning. Now, the next weapon that we actually got to talk about is the Operator. Now, the Operator is a very powerful gun. It's one of the guns that can completely dictate a meta, but not every character can use the Operator. Really, it's even more important to have that out, like we talked about with the Marshal on the Operator, because the risk is high. And oftentimes, Marshal is more of a gamble when Operator needs to be consistent, reliable, and you do not want to die if you miss a shot on the op, or you do not want to get traded, even if you hit a shot on the Operator. So that's why it's going to be best in the hands of Jet and Chamber. But those characters being so near the top of the meta make the Operator completely define the meta in a lot of ways. And if we just talk about ranked, everyone and their mother will use the Operator from time to time. So you're always going to have to know how to go up against the Operator, and practicing your jiggle peaks, being disciplined with your crosshair placement, and flushing angles out with utility are some of the best ways to counter that op. Of course, I can cover that more in detail in a separate video. Now, before we get to Fight Night, we do got to talk about the Sheriff, which I'm actually putting in S tier here. And the Sheriff is one of the most bought weapons in pro play. It is very, very strong. It's one of those weapons that if your team can't buy, your team can't afford it, oftentimes you'll buy that Sheriff. Oftentimes in ranked, duelist players will even buy the Sheriff after that first round loss, especially if they got a kill or two, because they'll still be able to afford buying a rifle in the preceding round if they manage to get some value out of that Sheriff. The Sheriff can directly clutch entire rounds. It can roll people, even people that are using rifles like Vandals and Phantoms, and even operators in some cases. It's a weapon that gives you one of the highest clutch capabilities, but similar to the Marshal, it's high risk, high reward, right? It's high skill necessary to utilize it, but it definitely rewards you. And the fact that the Sheriff is so strong means that a lot of these other eco alternatives that we talked about in that $1,000 price range or less are kind of being shut out. Like we talked about some of the other options, like the Stinger and like the Bucky. Like these weapons are not that good when you line them up directly against the Sheriff. Sure, there's cheeky ways that you could utilize them, but if you're honest with yourself, most of the time you're flocking to those weapons over the Sheriff because those require less skill, they're easy to use, and you consider them more guaranteed value. But the Sheriff is definitely something worth grinding because when you finally unlock the skill set required to utilize it, you're gonna realize how many games and rounds you can win just off the back of this weapon. It's one of the most important weapons to get good at, and if you get good at it in ranked and become a Sheriff Demon, you're gonna be winning round after round just out of fucking nowhere, and that's why the gun's so good. Now, the last weapons that we gotta talk about in the S tier is the Phantom and the Vandal. And for now, I'm actually putting the Vandal for the first time over the Phantom because of the pro pick rate. We've seen a shift where in some regions like North America, it's still about 50-50, but in a lot of regions, the Vandal is actually winning. Now, the Phantom is still strong, and on some characters, you're gonna wanna use it. If you play in and around smokes, you're gonna wanna use it. If you're playing defensively, the Phantom is gonna be better, being able to penalize people from pushing through smokes, checking and clearing, punishing enemies in that regard, or just close range fighting around angles in swing battles and things like that. The Phantom is gonna thrive. But in a meta that has a little bit less smokes now, that Astra is kind of taking a back seat, and on maps that have more open sight lines, the Vandal is just becoming better and better. It's looking better and better, and a lot of people already prefer it. It's definitely the fan favorite by far. The majority of people just absolutely hate the feeling of getting 140 in the head with the Phantom. I will say that if you use the same discipline with the Vandal on the Phantom, you will have more consistent value with it, but in this situation, it looks like it's going to be more personal preference, but the Vandal does edge it out based on pick rate. So for now, I'm going to give it the best gun of patch 4.05. But let me know what you agree or disagree with me on this list. There's some weapons that I could see moving up or down a couple of spots, but I really want to hear your opinion about it down below. But the GameLeap website's the best way to quickly climb with in-depth tips, tricks, guides, and so much more. Do yourself a favor, and if you want to climb incredibly quickly, go check it out right now down below.